Hey guys, tonight we're flying high above the clouds, 33,000 feet to be exact. The hum of jet engines cradles you in a steady rhythm as we step aboard a Boeing 727. It's November 24th, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving. Passengers settle into their seats, eyes glazed from long layovers or pre-holiday fatigue. Outside, the skies over Portland are cool and gray. Inside, it's just another routine flight, or so it seems. A man boards the plane. Mid-40s, tall, wearing a black suit and a narrow tie. Sunglasses, even though it's gloomy. He moves without hurry and takes his place in seat 18C, toward the rear, not too close to the lavatory. He orders bourbon and soda and lights a cigarette, blending in with the crowd. You'd hardly notice him. But under his arm is a black briefcase, one that, if what he says is true, contains a bomb. And what he's about to do, you probably wouldn't survive it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is, whether it's midnight in Ohio or 3 a.m. in Manila. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It began quietly. Flight 305 was a short hop from Portland to Seattle. The man in seat 18C handed a small folded note to the flight attendant. She smiled politely, assuming it was a phone number. She dropped it into her pocket without reading it. But then came the voice. Low, calm, direct. "Ma'am, you'd better read that note." She did, and her eyes widened. Because this wasn't a lonely man looking for a date. This was a hijacker, and he wasn't bluffing. The briefcase next to him, he claimed, held a bomb. The air in the cabin still hummed with quiet conversation and clinking ice cubes. Nobody else knew yet, but from that moment forward, the world of air travel would never be the same again.
The paper was small, folded with care, the kind of thing someone might write directions or an address on. But its message was chilling. In precise, almost polite lettering, it stated that the man had a bomb, and he wanted very specific things in exchange for everyone's safety. Tina Mucklow, the flight attendant, sat beside him as instructed. He opened the briefcase just enough for her to glimpse what looked like 8 red cylinders wired to a battery. The man remained composed, no raised voice, no threats, just steady instructions as though he were ordering lunch. He gave her a second note to deliver to the captain. On it were his demands: $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, 2 front chutes and 2 back, and a fuel truck waiting in Seattle to refill the plane. If they complied, no one would be hurt. If they didn't, well, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Back in the cockpit, the captain calmly informed air traffic control they were being hijacked, and in a way that still baffles many today, the plane continued flying as planned. The passengers, unaware, sipped their drinks, chatted about holiday plans, flipped through magazines, all while the crew quietly sprang into motion. Authorities on the ground were stunned. A skyjacking was rare, but a demand for multiple parachutes? That was something new. Why would a man with a bomb need 4? Unless he planned to jump. The air outside was growing colder as Flight 305 pushed northward.
Inside the cockpit, the pilot and co-pilot followed Cooper's instructions, communicating with air traffic control while pretending everything was routine. The man in seat 18C remained calm, never shouting, never panicking. His voice never even rose above a conversational tone. He'd asked for the plane to remain below 10,000 feet and to fly at a reduced speed. These weren't random preferences, they were deliberate. At that altitude and velocity, conditions would be just right for a parachute jump. The Boeing 727 had something else going for it too, a unique rear stairway that could be lowered mid-flight. Cooper knew this. He had studied this. As the plane circled above Seattle, waiting for law enforcement to gather the money and equipment, the passengers grew restless. Delays weren't uncommon during the holidays. They were told the delay was due to a minor mechanical issue. No one suspected a thing. Children napped. A woman quietly flipped through a paperback novel. Below, FBI agents scrambled. The $200,000 ransom, equivalent to over $1 million today, was gathered from local banks, stacked in $10,000 bundles, and packed into a civilian-style briefcase. The parachutes were also prepped, 2 for use, 2 as decoys, or so they assumed. Every request Cooper made was met, not because they trusted him, but because he had made one thing perfectly clear. The bomb was real, and he would use it. Back in the cabin, Tina sat close, relaying messages. She would later say that Cooper was strangely kind, polite even. He offered to request meals for the crew. He reassured her that everyone would be fine, so long as instructions were followed. But all of this, every second of compliance, was building towards something bigger. Something no one on board had ever imagined they'd witness from the inside of a pressurized cabin. He didn't just want to steal money. He wanted to vanish. As Flight 305 finally touched down in Seattle, the runway lights glowed against the wet tarmac. Rain had begun to fall, soft and steady, drumming against the fuselage. The plane taxied to a quiet area of the airport, away from terminals, away from prying eyes. Everything was ready. Per Cooper's instructions, the cabin lights were dimmed. The shades were drawn. No snipers, no tricks. He was clear about that. A man in a ground crew uniform approached cautiously with a package. Inside, $200,000 in used, unmarked $20 bills. 4 parachutes, 2 main, 2 reserve, were placed beside it. Each item passed through the stairwell, handed directly to Cooper by Tina. Then he made the next move. The passengers, 36 in total, were allowed to disembark. Some smiled, confused but grateful to stretch their legs. They never knew how close they had been to disaster. Not one of them realized a man with a live bomb had been sitting just rows away. The crew, however, would remain. Cooper needed pilots to fly him toward Mexico City and a flight engineer to keep everything running smoothly. The rear staircase remained closed for now. He laid out his final conditions. The next flight would stay low, no higher than 10,000 feet, and fly slow. The cabin would remain unpressurized, no fighter escorts. They would take off with the rear door sealed, but no one knew for how long. Cooper was oddly methodical. As the ground crew refueled the plane, he reviewed a map. He carefully selected a heading, south, toward Reno,
But it was clear he wasn't planning to land there. Outside, the rain thickened into a curtain. The sky above the Pacific Northwest grew darker, stormier. Inside the plane, fuel lines hissed and boots scuffed across wet asphalt. Cooper stood near the rear, silent, calculating. The passengers were gone. The money was his. The sky was waiting. And somewhere, deep in his mind, the countdown had already begun.
The engines roared to life again as Flight 305 lifted off the Seattle runway. But this time, there were no announcements, no clinking of glasses, no cheerful chatter about family or holiday dinners. The plane was nearly empty, just 5 souls on board, the flight crew and the man now known as D.B. Cooper. The jet climbed slowly into the blackness, leveling off at 10,000 feet. Outside, a winter storm was rolling over southern Washington. Rain lashed the windows, lightning flickered in the distance. In the cockpit, the pilot and co-pilot followed the prescribed course toward Reno. Tense silence filled the space between their clipped communications. Back in the cabin, Cooper acted with eerie precision. He tied the ransom bag to himself using parachute cord. He instructed the crew to remain behind the closed cockpit door. No one was to follow him, not even Tina. Then came the unmistakable sound, the whoosh hiss of the rear stairwell unlocking. That unique feature of the Boeing 727, the one that no other commercial aircraft had, now became Cooper's path to freedom, or oblivion. At 8:13 p.m., somewhere above the dense, rain-drenched woods near the Lewis River, an indicator light blinked in the cockpit. The aft stairway had deployed. The pilots felt a sudden shift in pressure, followed by a jolt like someone leaping into the wind. No distress call, no warning, just the roar of storm clouds swallowing the night. They flew on, as instructed, until reaching Reno. There, the plane landed under heavy FBI surveillance, but Cooper was gone. No one waited at the rear, only the empty stairwell, slick with rain, and a cabin that felt like it had shed a ghost. In the blackness outside, miles of wilderness stretched in every direction. Mountains, rivers, pines tall enough to disappear in. No one had seen him jump. No one had heard the scream of wind as he fell. Only one thing was certain. D.B. Cooper had exited the plane. And from that moment forward, no one would ever be quite sure what happened next. By sunrise, the world knew his name. D.B. Cooper, a man with no confirmed identity, no known past, and now no traceable future. FBI teams were mobilized within hours. Military helicopters, search dogs, and hundreds of volunteers fanned out across southwestern Washington. They focused on a 20-mile stretch of thick forest near the Lewis River, the estimated jump zone based on flight data. But that forest was dense, layers of fir and cedar cloaked in fog, the ground below slick with moss and snowfall. Searchers found nothing. No parachute, no footprints, no torn clothing snagged on branches or blood in the underbrush. It was as if he had slipped between dimensions, vanished through a rip in the sky itself. The authorities combed rivers, dredged reservoirs, and knocked on doors in nearby towns. Farmers were asked to report anything unusual in their fields. Hunters were questioned. Every lead evaporated. The FBI even simulated the jump, using mannequins dropped from aircraft under similar conditions.
The goal was to test whether someone could survive the leap Cooper made. The results were mixed. Survival, possible, but unlikely. The wind speeds, cold air, and pitch darkness created a deadly mix. No navigation equipment, no light, and if he landed in the trees, the parachute could have tangled, broken bones, worse. And yet, there was no body. Weeks turned into months. Investigators ran down thousands of leads, followed tips that stretched from Washington to Mexico, but every path either dead-ended or led to someone who definitely wasn't Cooper. And still, there was the money. Not a single bill surfaced. The FBI had photographed and recorded every serial number. Banks and casinos were alerted. Stores were told to check their 20s, but not $1 turned up. As if $200,000 had been dropped into the sky and never hit the ground. Cooper's disappearance wasn't just a mystery. It was a silence so deep, it echoed.
As the years rolled on, the legend of D.B. Cooper didn't fade. It grew louder, stranger, more entangled with myth. For every year without answers, there were new theories, new believers, and even new criminals trying to capture a sliver of his shadow. By the mid-1970s, Cooper copycats began to emerge. Several men attempted skyjackings of their own, demanding parachutes and cash, mimicking the original blueprint. But none succeeded like Cooper. Most were captured. Some didn't survive their jumps. Their attempts only added to the mystique of the man who had done it first and had done it clean. Then came a discovery. Nearly a decade after the hijacking, in 1980, a young boy named Brian Ingram was digging a fire pit along the Columbia River with his family when he found something unusual. Bundles of decaying $20 bills partially buried in the sand. The bills matched the serial numbers from the ransom money. It was a moment that reignited the fire. The location, over 20 miles from the estimated drop zone, raised more questions than it answered. How did the money get there? Was it carried downstream by the river? Buried intentionally? Dropped by Cooper during his descent? There was no body, no parachute, just 3 packets of weathered bills, torn by time and water, like the whisper of a memory refusing to disappear. Investigators returned to the area, hopeful that the find might crack the case open. But again, nothing else surfaced. No more cash, no gear, no remains. Instead, the find fed the legend. The press ran wild with speculation. Some believed the money was planted to mislead investigators. Others thought Cooper had hidden it as a symbol, a trail marker for those willing to chase him. One thing was certain. He had become more than a criminal. He was now folklore, a ghost drifting through jet streams and forests, a name carved on the underside of aviation history.
The list of possible D.B. Coopers began as a trickle and soon turned into a flood. Ex-cons, disgruntled veterans, missing persons, men with military training, parachute experience, or mysterious pasts. Some were turned in by family. Others came forward themselves, wrapped in half-truths and fading memories. One suspect was Richard McCoy, a former Green Beret who hijacked a plane in 1972 using a nearly identical method. Note: bomb threat, parachute escape. But McCoy was captured days later and eventually killed in a prison escape attempt. The FBI ruled him out, noting key differences in appearance and manner. Then came Dwayne Weber, a dying man who confessed to his wife in a hospital bed, "I'm Dan Cooper." After his death, she claimed he had nightmares about jumping from planes and had once left a notebook scribbled with strange codes. But fingerprint comparisons didn't match. There were others: a leather worker in Oregon, a career criminal in California, even a man in Canada who claimed to be Cooper living under a new identity. Each theory brought hope until forensic evidence, alibis, or sheer lack of proof shut them down. Years passed, faces aged, witness memories grew hazy, sketches were reinterpreted, voices reimagined. The longer the case dragged on, the harder it became to separate reality from myth. The FBI remained persistent. Over 4 decades, they investigated more than 1,000 suspects. Each time they thought they'd found the one, something didn't fit. Fingerprints, DNA, height, weight, eye color, accent. The man who had walked onto Flight 305 in 1971, calm, polite, unreadable, had seemingly vanished, not just from the sky, but from the very fabric of time. Every new lead frayed the truth a little more, until the case became less about solving a crime and more about chasing a phantom. And perhaps that was the most brilliant part of his plan. Not just to escape, but to become unsolvable. Decades passed. Technology advanced. Cold cases once frozen by the limits of 1970s science were now thawed by DNA testing and digital databases. But D.B. Cooper remained locked in the clouds, untouched, unsolved. By the 1990s, his name had outgrown the case. He became a pop culture icon, a symbol of rebellion, of cool calculation, of the lone outlaw who defied a system and vanished without a trace. His face appeared on T-shirts, beer bottles, comic books. Songs were written, conventions were held. People dressed like him for Halloween. And curiously, his legacy was strangely bloodless. There were no hostages hurt, no shots fired. In a world of brutal crimes and senseless violence, Cooper's act stood apart, almost theatrical, like a magician's vanishing trick performed at 10,000 feet. Even the FBI seemed haunted by the case. Agents dedicated years, entire careers, to chasing shadows. They stored files taller than desks, followed tips from obsessed amateurs, and even consulted with behavioral profilers. But time wore everything thin. In July of 2016, after 45 years of investigation, the FBI officially closed the case. They would no longer actively pursue leads unless new physical evidence emerged. The legend outlasted the manhunt. And maybe that's what Cooper wanted all along. Not just to get away with it, but to become a part of the atmosphere itself. To drift like contrails across a sky where the laws of gravity and justice couldn't quite reach. He was never caught, never found, just gone. And yet, somehow, still everywhere. The storm had passed that night, but not before swallowing something, or someone, into its dark, tumbling heart. Somewhere between the roaring engines and the breathless quiet of the forest below, a man slipped through a narrow door at the rear of a plane and entered history by falling out of it. He left behind no body, no broken parachute tangled in the trees, not even a footprint pressed into the soft mud. What he left was less tangible, but somehow heavier, a mystery with no edges, no center, just the outline of a man against the canvas of a cloud-streaked night. The forests of the Pacific Northwest are thick with mist in the early morning. Pines sway like sentinels in the silence, and rivers carve their secrets into the soil. It's not hard to imagine him there still, somewhere deep within that maze of moss and memory, waiting out the decades like a ghost who never planned to haunt, only to vanish. And so we arrive at the vanishing point. Not a destination, not a grave, but a soft blur where facts dissolve into folklore. Tonight, maybe you'll dream of that sound. The rear door swinging open mid-flight, the wind rushing like an ocean wave, and a figure stepping into the void with nothing but a parachute and a plan. Maybe he didn't survive. Maybe he did. But the man called D.B. Cooper found a way to escape not just the law, but time itself. And as you drift toward sleep now, imagine him gliding through the wind, silent, calm, and absolutely free.